Welcome to the League of American Orchestras podcast series exploring the innovative practices described in Fearless Journeys, Innovation in Five American Orchestras. I'm Catherine Maciariello, your host for this discussion. The League published Fearless Journeys in 2010, and the book takes us inside five creative orchestras: the Atlanta Symphony, the Pacific Symphony, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and the Memphis Symphony, showing how they overturned conventional assumptions about programming, organizational culture, and community engagement, and discovered new strategies and pathways to success. Fearless Journeys was made possible by a generous grant from the MetLife Foundation with additional support from the National Endowment for the Arts. The book is available as a downloadable PDF as well as for Kindle and EPUB from the League's website at americanorchestras.org. Today I'm joined by a team from the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. Lisa Dixon is Chief Operating Officer, and Susanna Gilmore is Concertmaster of the orchestra. Dan Poag is immediate past board chair. Welcome to everybody.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello. The Memphis Symphony was facing some pretty debilitating challenges a decade ago, and at 50 years old, you guys were caught in a predicament that's pretty familiar to a lot of other orchestras: budget deficits, declining audiences, community apathy. But you did an unusually brave thing in response. You began a deeply self-conscious and open-minded evaluation of your perceived relevance in the community, and as a result, you made some fundamental changes in your internal value proposition. The result was a new set of vibrant community partnerships and a really completely different organization. In another podcast, we talk with a group from the Memphis Symphony about what this all meant for the orchestra and the community, and we explore the MSO's community partnership model. But in this session, we want to focus on what it all meant for the organization itself. Lisa, let's start with you. This is kind of the chicken and egg question. Was it developing your community partnerships that drove your culture of inclusion and collaboration, or was it the other way around?
It's a good question. I think in Memphis it really went hand in hand. Before the commitment to developing community partnerships, the seeds were in place for a collaborative culture. But I do think it was the partnerships that brought us all together and really gave us a reason to work together. We had musicians, staff, and board that we really had to learn to listen and to communicate in whole new ways to figure out how to make these partnerships work.
One of the things that's interesting to me about it, too, is that, and it seems to hold true with other orchestras, is that by coming together around something that's totally new, it's slightly non-threatening. So you have an opportunity to build a culture without having to kind of confront the traditional obstacles and roadblocks that occur in all organizations. So what does, Lisa, this is a follow-up for you. What does it mean to be innovative? What does being in that process of innovation mean to you? Why is organizational culture so important to fostering innovation?
I think it's really critical because innovation, it really means it requires substantial change on a whole number of fronts, and that can be scary for everyone involved. And so I think in Memphis, for us to succeed, we realized we needed ownership on all levels in order to make this change happen, and that kind of change and that sort of culture really requires a great degree of trust and transparency within our organization. And so, ultimately, in order to be an effective community partner, we really did need to unify ourselves internally and really dig in and figure out how to build these partnerships.
Well, that leads me to ask Dan and Susanna to comment on that. Can I ask both of you, was there an awareness within the board and within the orchestra, sort of from the beginning, that you were talking about some major cultural shifts within your constituencies, or did it sneak up on you gradually?
Well, speaking from the board's perspective, I think there was we had to think in a different way, and I think that perhaps we started asking some uncomfortable questions of ourselves about why we were there, why we existed, why we were doing these things, and I think that started leading to some discussions about the service perspective and why the board exists at all. And fundamentally, I think the question had to be addressed this way: is that the orchestra is in business of serving the community of Memphis. The board is in the business of serving the musicians, and that we only exist really to make them to enable them to perform their task in the community of serving Memphis. And once you start from a service perspective, then I think it starts opening the door to some different ways of looking at music and how the musical talents of our musicians can be used to make Memphis a better place to live.
How did that play out for you, Susanna, and for your colleagues in the orchestra?
I think that there was a growing awareness that we were undergoing sort of a reinvention of ourselves as a symphony 5 years ago, when we started doing very serious strategic planning and having very honest dialogues between the management and the board and the musicians about our future and our relevance in Memphis. And I can remember sitting in that room and looking around the room and seeing a significant cross-constituency from the musicians within the orchestra, from veterans who'd been there for decades to somebody who was just hired a year ago, between full-time players and part-time players, principal players and non-principal players. So I think that sent a very strong message to everybody that we were beginning a process of major change.
It makes sense that within the management there are people whose task it is to kind of manage process and manage culture and take leadership. And that's a standard practice for leaders on the management side. I wonder, for both the board and the orchestra, who emerged to take the lead in stewarding discussions within your constituencies in a way that built consensus and helped people take ownership in the emerging ideas about your community partnerships?
Well, from the board perspective, there were a lot of people on the board who had been there under previous designs, previous ways of doing business, and I think that we really had to change the board in order to get the people who would look at this in a new way. The older members of the board, the ones that had been around for many years, were not particularly open to the idea of really engaging with the musicians and talking with them and listening to them and trying to develop a team approach. So we had to find some new leadership there. I think I'd like to speak for the musicians. I think that Susanna and other members of the team there were critical in this process. They were sufficiently open to start listening to some new ideas, and we started sharing together what our goals were and how we might better serve the community, and that started leading to some very interesting outcomes.
Susanna, was it hard for you to step up into this kind of new role?
Actually, it happened so organically within our culture within the last 5 years that it felt natural for me to take on the role and sort of a logical choice, as the concertmaster has a interesting role already in the organization that bridges the world of the musicians to the management, to the board, to the community. So it seemed like a sort of a natural augmentation of my personal version of my job description to do it. But I by no means am the only musician who did it. But I definitely interpreted my role as concertmaster as being ripe for serving on different discussion panels and committees and being as best as I could be a sort of diplomat between different constituencies. But I can reel off, at least a dozen other musicians who have also rolled up their sleeves and took a very active role in all of these innovations.
Lisa, let me ask you something about this too, because what I am hearing from both Dan and Susanna is that there's a new approach to leadership in your organization. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I think the new approach to leadership in Memphis is not really. I guess it's more in terms of just the overall appreciation for the value of having leadership really within all all levels of the organization. So it's just changing. It's not a traditional definition of leadership anymore, but there really is an appreciation for having strong leaders within the musicians, within the staff, within the board, and really a commitment to investing and really further developing that leadership and expanding that so that it's really owned. The future, our future for the organization is owned by all parties involved.
How do you engage what I guess others might call junior staff in this process? Are you able to spread this across the institution?
Absolutely. Our approach here has been really team-oriented, as Susanna and Dan have mentioned, and so I think the important lessons we've learned is it's important to involve everyone, and that doesn't mean just the usual suspects that get involved in everything every time we do anything new, but really trying to branch out and engaging people not just in the implementation of new ideas, but actually engaging people in developing those ideas, implementing them, and then also evaluating them on the back end so that there's this ongoing building of trust, and then also the communication aspect is so key. As you know, you can never communicate enough. So we've been really putting a lot of deliberate effort over the last 5 years or so in trying to develop new ways to communicate and strengthen our communication amongst all the groups involved.
Well, one of the people we haven't talked about yet is the music director, and I know you have a new music director, and I'm wondering if the experience of the last 5 years that you talk about informed your search process at all.
Absolutely. I would say our search process was just kind of furthered this internal culture in the way that we approached it. We had a committee of 12 individuals. 6 of them were musicians and 6 of them were community members, and I do think that this sort of this culture of inclusion and collaboration spilled over into that search process. And I know Dan and Susanna, you were both involved in that. I don't know if either of you would like to say a couple of words about that process.
I absolutely agree with Lisa that the way that we conducted our search sort of represented in a microcosm what has been going on in the whole organization by the organization opting to make it half musicians and half non-musicians, which is way above and beyond what is specified in our master agreement. So it was as democratic and as inclusive a process as it could possibly be, and the ability of our incoming music director to further the work that any strides that we've accomplished in improving the orchestra's relevance in our community was a major priority.
That's great. I'd like to ask Dan a question. You talked earlier about having to make some rather wholesale changes in the board in order to sort of move in this new direction, and I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about how the new board members fit into this picture. How does the board operate these days? Has your role changed at all? Do you measure your expectations and success around board membership differently? And how is the board helping to keep this sort of new spirit of innovation alive despite difficult economic times?
Well, I think the first ingredient in making the board work successfully with the staff and the musicians is communication. I can recall one of our early meetings, in one of our early meetings with the musicians, I talked to a couple of musicians that said in their time in the orchestra they'd never met a board member. And I was shocked by that, frankly, that the board was that disengaged from the people that we work for, really. And so I think that what we initially were looking for in the early days was people who would really be willing to and successfully engage and talk with and get to know the musicians and what their lives were like and what they were doing and why they were here, and to really try to understand them, and then to in that process find those musicians who are willing to listen to our vision and what we were thinking about in terms of engagement with the community, service to the community, making Memphis a better place to live. And thankfully there were some leaders among the musicians and that were open and were willing to listen like Susanna, and who are truly innovative people. And I think it can't be left unsaid that the many, if not most, of the initiatives that we have are emerging from the musicians and with the support of the staff, and not from the board. So they're very much coming from the people who have the talent and who are now committed to, I think, this vision of serving Memphis.
It's amazing, actually, and we've seen this before, how far respect and reciprocity can go within an organization in terms of feeding a positive and collaborative culture. You're not the first orchestra really to talk about that. But Susanna, I can't imagine that the culture would mean very much to musicians if it didn't somehow feel right for the musical soul of the artist and the organization. Could you comment on the links between a strong organizational culture and the ability to stimulate meaningful artistic and musical expression on stage?
I think that it is absolutely vital for artists and for symphony musicians, but all artists, to take ownership in their product. And I think that, there's been, many studies and commentaries about orchestral musicians being notoriously unhappy people, with their job. And I think a lot of it has to do with, for especially non-principal players, feeling that they don't have a voice, that they can't be heard. So the only way that they can have their viewpoints heard or feel like they're valued is to be channeled through very official channels, and there's a major disconnect. But what I am seeing now in the Memphis Symphony is increased morale sort of across the board from the musicians seeing their creative ideas valued and implemented beyond just showing up and playing beautifully, which is, of course, never a value that we toss out. But there is definitely a deepened sense of ownership in the whole organization for the musicians to feel like we are being heard and appreciated, and to actually have created some of these projects that are obviously helping the orchestra in the community.
Well, I hear you saying that it does, in fact, by feeding your creative juices, help you be more committed to your job, find more fulfillment, play better, and in general just engage more with the organization. So that's great to hear.
I think for many of us, if I may follow up, it's a powerful feeling to not be passive about the state of our organization. So we have this culture where we are able to try to be as creative as possible and to feel like we're playing as much of a role as we can in helping the orchestra become stronger in the community. And I don't want it to be interpreted that the musicians are doing office work or answering phone calls. We've been doing very creative project design and program design, and it's been very rewarding, the stuff that we've been doing.
Well, and I would encourage people to listen to the other podcast we did with a group from the Memphis Symphony, where we talk about those kinds of partnerships. And it's incredibly inspiring to hear you and to hear you talk about how that has made your job more meaningful. As we kind of come to the end of the conversation, I know listeners might want to hear from you about what you've learned along the way. You've been talking a lot about that. Organizational cultures are never static. You never finish being innovative. Living in a state of innovation is an ongoing challenge and process. And I wonder if each of you might conclude by commenting on what you think are the most important things you've learned personally along your journey. What does it feel like to be in this constant state of innovation, and what advice might you give other organizations about how to manage uncertainty and risk and ambiguity and all the things that go along with innovation? What aspects of your culture are absolutely necessary for success, and what could be applied in other circumstances? Let's see, Lisa, would you like to take that first?
Sure, I would. We've touched on so many of these points already, but I do think that just the openness and commitment to really communicating and developing the solutions together. So it's okay to come to a table with a group of musicians, staff, and board and to not know what the answer is, any one of those groups, but really using the collective wisdom of that body of, we've got such creative, bright artists within our mix as orchestras, and we've got the link to the community through our board members, and we have the staff here that makes it all come together. So pulling all those people together and really tapping into the resources that you've got locally and within the organization in order to solve the problems and to figure out what the right next step is.
As a staff member, what things did you feel that you have learned personally through this process that have helped you be a better manager?
I would say I've definitely learned to listen and to just try and oversee, I guess, make really the deliberate steps to ensuring that we've got a strong internal culture, because it's one thing to have a small group of people that are really on board, but it's another thing, and it does require very deliberate effort to take that small group that sees the vision, has a shared vision, and knows what we're trying to do, but then how do you expand that so that there's really a broad base of ownership throughout the organization? And I think that has been, I did not appreciate going into all of this, just how much time and effort and how important that process is. So I think from my standpoint, I've definitely learned a lot about that in order to help this organization succeed.
Well, you make a really important point, I think, that this kind of culture and any kind of culture doesn't happen and doesn't advance without careful and deliberate stewardship. I mean, it's not an accidental thing, and that's a good point, I think, to reiterate for people. Susanna, how about you?
I think, to use a similar word to Lisa's, the most valuable lesson I've learned and continue to learn is how important it is to listen to other viewpoints and to feedback and to constructive criticism, and to approach all of these new situations with an open mind and understanding that there isn't a textbook to follow for any of this stuff. So it's very important to learn from what people who are more experienced in these areas, and to so I think the listening is very important.
Well, and I also hear you saying that you have to accept that it's actually okay not to know all the answers all the time. Yeah. That living with that uncertainty can be really stimulating and provocative. Dan, let's give you the last word on this.
I think that Lisa and Susanna have said it very well, and they've said the things that I would say. I guess I could say me too. But I would like to add that I think it's important to establish a culture of service, and have the board understand that our job is to serve the musicians, and through the musicians, the institution that we're on the board of. In other words, we have to keep our focus on that goal. And then once you do that, you've got to be very flexible and open. And I think both said you have to come to the table not knowing the answer. You have to be willing to accept an answer and work with an answer that's not necessarily the one you would choose, but the one that seems right for the organization and for all the constituencies involved. So I think listening is critical, and that involves frequent contact in different contexts. And it means broad-based contact. In other words, not just the leaders, but having some input and contact with others in the organization. who have previously, I think, felt powerless, as Susanna was describing. And I do believe that listening all the way, and listening means not just listening, but listening actively so that you're prepared to take action on those ideas and those comments and thoughts that seem constructive and that will lead to good conclusions for our organization.
Well, you make also, I think, an important point about the importance of both formal communication and informal communication as techniques to advance culture. I mean, the conversation happens within the formal structures you have within the organization, but it also happens informally as you encounter each other in daily life and in less institutional frameworks. So that's an important thing to say, I think. Also, I'd really like to thank all three of you, Lisa, Susanna, and Dan, for joining us. You're most generous with your time, and your insights are both interesting and provocative, and we certainly wish you well as you move forward, and we hope people will call you and explore these ideas in more detail. For more information, we do invite listeners to contact the Memphis Symphony Orchestra and to certainly read Fearless Journeys. Just a reminder, Fearless Journeys is available as a downloadable PDF as well as for Kindle and EPUB from the League's website at americanorchestras.org. Thank you for joining us.